Hi there, my name is Aska Fiaz, and for my AS Media Series project, I chose to do a magazine. My magazine is by the title Bounded Brides, and it focuses on early childhood marriages, specifically in the region where I'm from, Pakistan. The aim of my magazine is to overall raise awareness around young childhood marriages, challenge the dominant narratives around marriages, and overall expose the emotional, psychological, and educational consequences these young girls have to go due to an early childhood marriage. So, through the use of strong visual symbolism, emotive storytelling, and conventional magazine layout, my product overall combines realism with advocacy to present childhood marriages as a social injustice, challenging what it has become now as a cultural norm. Now, talking in terms of conventions, my magazine both followed and challenged typical magazine conventions. In terms of following, let's take the example of my cover page. My cover page both incorporated a bold masthead, a central cover image, as well as strong cover lines, which are the typical elements of a magazine. This overall made my magazine appear professional and appear as a recognizable media format. However, I also deliberately challenged some conventional representations in terms of marriages, specifically through my photography. Usually, in bridal photography, the bride is presented as happy and glamorous. However, I challenged this and I presented my young brides as trapped, vulnerable, and distressed. This can overall be seen in my photography, where I used close up shots to emotionally grab the audience's attention, such as the child, the young girl, is shedding a tear in this image, which overall symbolically storytells that the emotional distress we're putting these young girls into. Then, through the use of shadows and chains, I create this disturbing imagery which overall reflects the trappedness and lack of freedom, the power imbalance when it comes to child marriages. I wanted to represent the social group of the young girls who are victims of systematic injustice, who are powerless, silenced, and vulnerable due to the consequence of childhood marriages. So therefore, I represented the issue of child marriages as a social injustice, a loss of childhood and education of the young girls, and the root cause of patriarchy, poverty, and the traditions that root back. So through challenging these conventions and representation of the social group, I wanted to reconsider the meaning of marriages when consent and choice aren't an option. So my magazine engages the audience through a emotional and visual impact. When we're talking in terms of visuals, my photography, such as using the intense red color, then incorporating chains and dark shadows, which just overall shows the danger, the loss of childhood, and the trappedness when it comes to childhood marriages. Then, through the contrast in the school uniform and a heavy bridal dupatta, which is a traditional wedding attire in Pakistan, I just overall wanted to project the theme about stolen childhood and erased dreams. To create an emotional impact, I incorporated a total narrative of a girl called Senab who was a victim of childhood marriage, which overall allowed the audiences to connect on a human level rather than just viewing abstract, and this created just an emotional closeness between the girls and the audience. Then overall in my article I used direct and emotional language, which just overall disposition the reader to feel empathy, emotion, and morally responsible for the injustice that these girls have to go through. And in terms of a audience engagement, I also did a questionnaire in the context of childhood marriages, and the response were quite emotional in the sense that people do agree that this shouldn't be a cultural norm. However, it still continues in our society. Therefore, by creating this magazine, I wanted to spread awareness. Now, in terms of distribution, I believe that everyone could be a target audience because this is a social injustice of our conventional society today, and therefore, everyone has the right to be aware about this injustice, and we can all work together to overcome this. In terms of the educational angle, the students and the young generation can be socially aware about this issue through distributing my magazine in schools and colleges. And in today's society, we are digitally evolved, so therefore I'm planning to connect with a digital NGO and present my magazine Bounded Brides through a collaboration with the NGO. Overall, making my media distribution method more accessible to the younger audiences who should be aware about this issue. I would say this whole project was a great learning experience for me, since I not only became better at production in terms of photography, yet I also improved my editing and graphic designing skills. I would like to say I became a better director in this journey as I improved my ability to plan, such as during the pre-production stage I was able to plan the whole costume design and the different types of shots I wanted to incorporate. Then in terms of the main element photography, I was able to stage my photographs in an effective manner by paying close attention to elements such as lighting to create mood, different shots and angles to create a powerful impact. Overall, also focusing on the model's body language and framing and directing the model's body language in such a way to communicate emotions and meaning in an impactful way. Then, in the context of editing, by following many YouTube tutorials, listening to my teacher's guidelines, and practicing Photoshop, I was able to enhance my skills and apply them to over here as well. For this specific project, I learned the technique of how to wrap text around the photo. Other than that, I learned how to balance text and images, how to incorporate white space when it comes to designing, how to create visual hierarchy through the placement of your photography, the placement of your title. I was able to improve my designing skills and maintain consistency throughout my magazine. Another thing I would like to say I improved was my narrative and storytelling skills. In terms of, I understood how a visual storytelling can take place by a single photograph, how a single photograph, in terms of how you frame it, in terms of the different mise-en-scène elements you use, such as lighting and body language of the models, you can create a really strong visual story through just a single clip. Technology played a really important role when it came to my project. For example, the hardware technology I used for my photography was my Canon 60D camera. During this production process, I learned major new things about my camera, such as I learned how to use the ISO, how to use the f-stop to create effective images. Then for lighting, I used lighting to create different moods. I used the sunset lamp, which overall allowed me to play with the mood and intensify the overall theme of my photography. Moving on to the software, after my photography process, I actually converted my photographs first into the Lightroom app, where I used color grading to overall intensify the symbolic elements such as the shadows and the lightning to overall create an impactful image. Then I converted these images into the Photoshop app, where I overall designed the layout of my magazine. I also ensured to incorporate topography tools in order to ensure I emphasized the key themes such as clarity and readability in my magazine. Then through online resources, I also carried out my research, such as also including a narrative in my magazine in order to ensure that the information I provided in my magazine was informed, realistic, and socially relevant. Through the integration of software, hardware, and online research, I ensured that I was able to convert this sensitive social issue into a coherent professional media product. In conclusion, my magazine, Bounded Brides, effectively combines conventional magazine features with challenging representations in order to address the issue of childhood marriages. By using emotional imagery, symbolic contrasts, and a real narrative, my magazine aims to educate, engage, and provoke thought among its audiences. The overall project allowed me to develop creatively and technically while deepening my understanding of how media can be used as a powerful tool to create social awareness and